don't get hung up on it.
That's all right. Okay. Okay. So one of the serious question for you guys. Who thinks they have looked into the void?
Me.
I
think I have.
I'm Asperger's, right? So I kind of like have Asperger's. I have a highly systematized like logic brain, if you will. So I'm not super emotional, but I would say that like my misanthropy is my equivalent of looking into the abyss and becoming the abyss. Like I gained my awareness about those sort of things was my staring into the abyss. And so my new perspective is me becoming the abyss. In the words of Nietzsche, if you stare long enough, you'll become part of it.
Okay, I want to hear everybody else's take. Let me just say one thing to you, White Gamer. Are you willing to consider the possibility that there is a ways more to go from there? Like that is still like a disdain for choice. There are more fundamental things than that.
Yeah, I definitely say that I'm not one to say all hope is lost, right?
Okay, good.
That's what white pill ideas are, in my opinion, are the silver lining of situations like that. The things that could help redeem, like I said, the problems I talk about, anti-intellectualism, and if, like I said, people that were geniuses, we would have them have tons of children. Like it would be as simple as promoting sapiosexuality. Like there are real changes that can be made. While that probably won't happen, there are very real solutions.
Well, right, and it seems so silly, as you say, that we can't overcome just like looks, right? If women, like literally, it's men and women both looking at each other and saying, "I want you based on your looks," more or less, right? And if people were sapios more, right, we would continue to have smarter and smarter children in well-adjusted families, like family units, right, or like some sort of like we can change that a little bit, right? Maybe society is due for a little bit more of like a communal change, and we've been blundering that terribly, right? Like maybe that was due, and we just kind of mishandled that as a species. Got to redo that, training children and like, teaching kids things. We gotta back up a step or two, maybe.
Right, definitely.
But the point that I'm trying to make here is, okay, hold on. I don't want to get too far down that road. We'll put a peg in that. We got to help the children somehow. Or, like, you guys all believe in the concept of white pill to some extent because you're still here, right? Like, you would off yourself if you had absolutely no reason to actually be here, right? So, and you figured out some portion of life that allows you guys to, like, retain your sanity in this world and still allows you to navigate through it to some extent toward maybe some goals and success, right? So keep that in mind. Good job, guys. You're one step closer to self-actualization or whatever crap they want to call it.
Well, I would say, even with my perspective of misanthropy, like, societal problems aren't the end-all, be-all to you still having a good life as an individual.
Sure. That's true.
You can still go have fun individual experiences or with, people that are close to you. Right. Until a certain point, if all social cohesion collapses, that's another thing. But yeah.
Sure. Right. I mean, choices may become limited as more and more people stop.
That goes back to what we said. That would be environment.
Sure. Well, right. Governments have been mishandling populations since.
Well, I said government too, but I was saying that would be environmental, though. That would be, that change would be environmental.
What do you mean by environmental? And then I want to get back to
what I'm saying is, like I said, the white pill of you don't have to really be fully concerned with society to have a good, prosperous life, but that might change if social cohesion collapses. It might change your perspective, but that's just the environment. That's not like having an epiphany. It's not
right. Yeah, that's just noticing what's happening.
Your hand being forced in that situation, essentially.
Well, status quo is changing, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. And then people, you say hand is forced, but some people see it differently, right? Just the point is, things are changing. That's the phenomenon here. Okay, and the reality is, women weren't internet goers for a long time. They were relatively late to the game as far as like being involved in what gets created on the internet, right? And online shopping became a thing,
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that we have to be dealing with, and what we have to keep in mind is, men have been working through like porn things and like internet stuff for a lot longer than a lot of women have. Like, they don't have as much background in dealing with their more base programming. So let's keep that in mind for just a minute. But I want to get back to the other guys first. Which one of you guys want to talk, James or Rami, about looking into the void? I think we have a lot of cool topics, but I want to give the other guys a chance to state their piece on that.
Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah. I mean, I can never say that I've had like the honor of becoming almost fully encapsulated with that aura per se. I've had, a lot of things that kept me active and going. I'm not sure by looking into void you mean like some sort of like profound, meditative, state of being when it comes to being existential, being fragile, being defective. Let me see here.
I think what you're saying is more indicative of who you are than anything that I thought about what I said.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's basically saying he's right. I think he looked into it, but then he just didn't really he didn't really take it to heart too much. Is what I'm kind of getting.
Oh yeah. I guess I can add on by saying that it's like how would that be conducive to that universal narrative that I'm setting up for myself? I mean,
well,
we're wired to go through hardships. We're wired to derive gratification from overcoming those hardships. So it's like, it's in the sense of, it's the least you can do for yourself for at least existing.
For even existing, you should at least attempt to look into the abyss just because it's there.
I think he's saying.
As I said first, like I'm no veteran at it, so I haven't had the, by this void, I'm assuming that you're talking about the state of existential
Crisis.
An existential state of being. I haven't given myself a wherewithal to be going into that. That's what I mean to say. As someone who's been absent from it, that's my perspective.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
You haven't wrestled with it yet.
I always assume my time will come. There's always
a reckoning.
There's always going to be things that are thrown at you as just the price of being part of this this story.
Oh, I see. You think it's inevitable, but you just haven't gotten there in your life yet.
Yes, I'd be willing to go as far as say that.
Interesting. Everybody will confront it. It's just a matter of time.
A matter of time, a matter of circumstance. I mean.
Oh, circumstance as well. Oh, some people never confront it.
That's something that's debatable. I mean, unless you die really young,
Suddenly, yeah.
If you're a kid and you just get eaten by something, that you don't have that opportunity. But
Interesting. Anything else that you would like to add?
no, I think that's it.
Rami, do you have anything you want to share on the topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think I looked into the void, but then I kind of just said screw that, because like, I mean, I do have like a religion in a sense to back me up though, so I don't know, like that kind of, like, I don't really, because for me, my ending thought to basically most things is, at some point I'm going to, like, at some, like, or okay, how do I, like, my ending thought to most things is that, like, I just call it God. You can call it whatever you want to call it, like, universal consciousness or whatever. Like, I just think God will end up, like I'll end up doing whatever is, like, kind of planned for me to do, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I think I have, like, I think I have stared into the void, actually, probably, like, a good amount of times at this point. But then it's like, more rather than like jumping into the void, I more just kind of observe it and then say, okay, like, this, I came to this place again from here. And then, like, later I came to this place again from here. And then, like, another time I came to this place again from here. So, like, there's multiple different angles, like, to come to this place. But then, I don't necessarily like jump in or like stay there. It's more of like just an observation.
Okay. So you okay. Interesting. I mean, I could. Are any of you anywhere close to despair at this point in your lives?
Well, my whole mental condition is prone to, like, by default, anxiety and depression symptoms.
Sure.
So when I was a kid, actually, I used to have panic attacks in school, but I didn't know what it was or why. And then, that probably ended up making me seem very odd and out of favor, so that hurt my social relationships. And I turned to, like, overeating and stuff, which compounded on the issue of socialization, right? And that made me depressed. So, like, before I ever found, like, Red Pill and all that stuff, I was already dealing with, like, being depressed and that sort of thing. But that's when I started smoking, and that's like helped ever since.
Was your state of depression, anxiety brought forth from a series of hardships that you might have gone through? I mean, you could be as vague or specific as you want.
No, I have Asperger's.
I see. I understand. Yeah, you did mention that.
Which makes you more prone to anxiety and depression, like, just literally from brain chemistry. And maybe not for everyone, it's subjective, right? Like, how much you're on the spectrum or whatever, how affected you are personally, or how like cannabis makes you feel. But, like, if I had to say, like, a medicine for it, like, weed pretty much does the trick.
Yeah. I was gonna say, how early did you start using?
Like 17 and a half.
And do you think that altered your brain chemistry? Like, do you think that impaired you in any way, or enhanced it?
Probably made me. I do think it probably knocked my total IQ down maybe 3 to 5 points.
Okay.
But I'm like, naturally, without being boastful, like, naturally high IQ anyways, right?
Well, Asperger's generally.
Usually, if you're more functional, you tend to be higher IQ. Like I said, systems type thinking, systems orientation thinking.
Yes,
and
true.
More logic brain. So, like, I'm like, yeah, I do feel a little dumber. Like, not gonna lie, sometimes I do have a slight bit more trouble, like, spelling words that maybe I didn't in the past, but like that's really it.
Shit, he muted himself.
Maybe I just went quiet.
Yeah, I wasn't looking at the screen and I realized he muted himself.
One second. I want to hear that thought, but I have a real one. 30 seconds and I'll be right back.
Okay. Honestly, staring into the void, like I think like James was saying earlier, unless you die early, then maybe you don't get that experience. But I think almost any person, especially like a young male, like maybe for women, I mean, I don't know this because I'm not a woman, obviously. Like it might happen for them later in life, or maybe it happens earlier. I don't know. But I think for like a young man, I think it happens like pretty for us. I think it's, like in your teens or 20s. I think that's when you probably have your first like staring into the void kind of
Existential confrontation.
yeah
with something else.
yeah
Maybe because I have my personal position, but my experience with this was probably when I graduated from school mid COVID-19. That was pretty terrible, and I'll probably never be able to forget it type of shit. That altered my life, like vastly out of my own personal control.
yeah
Okay.
I think COVID actually ended up like that whole year ended up being yeah
Well, it seems like the current world conditions have put a lot of people into like an accelerated rate of learning for whatever they're specifically trying to do, right, in their life, or whatever was a problem that they were able to ignore is no longer an ignorable problem, right?
yeah that's true. I think that's definitely
maybe
true.
that was from the disruption to like their daily routine.
Well, of course, right? People have had more time to themselves, which generally leads one to introspection.
Yeah.
But now on top of introspection, we have the cherry on top, which is mass internet access.
Well, right, which is this is the twist to all this, right? Normally, alone time means actual alone time and being
actually having to fully, isolate from other people.
Well, back in the day, people had a lot of alone time in the fields, working on like whatever they were doing. It took a long time, so they had a lot of time to think, right? And which is why people were so people knew the value of working together, right? They understood how important other people were for their continued survival, right? So continuing along that vein.
I guess like some of the drawbacks of like being in the vicinity of like potentially millions of other people is that you just have the opportunity to kind of build those relationships and become so increasingly scarce that it's nigh impossible.
Well, right, and that's the development of like parasocial relationships these days, right? Like people are so desperate for anything, they'll form even the bond of like thinking that the person on the other side of a YouTube video actually cares about them, right? Or maybe they actually do. I'm not trying to be too cynical about that, but the reality is it's a one-sided sort of relationship, right? And that's why they call it a parasocial relationship.
Well, they care. The thing is, it's just fractured because they care about those people, but they care about certain parts of those people. Whereas like their real life friends, if they still have any, care about a different part of that person, and then their family cares about a different part of that person, like their mother and father, their
Yeah.
siblings. Like, so in terms of the internet is a place where you can go and have some of your, like, you know, deepest fears or whatever. You can, like, you can share those with other people on the internet because of, like, the anonymity of it. Or you can go to maybe an influencer who discusses that stuff regularly and, like, interact with that community, or just, like, watch a video and then, like, look at the comments or something like that. And that's why, that's, like, I guess the strength you could say of, like, some, like, those internet relationships is that you're still relatively anonymous, so you can talk about, like, some stuff that you can talk about that you can't necessarily talk to your parents about, or if you did, they wouldn't give a shit, or your siblings, right? Like, depending on how close you are with your siblings, they wouldn't really want to discuss some of the things that you would be discussing with, or at least hearing discussed on the internet.
Sure, sure. Well, I mean, obviously, also if you're desperate enough to like go to the internet for advice or like talk about things, it means things are really bad in your current situation, more or less, right? Everybody, a lot of people know this these days, but some people don't, right? Like there are like 10 and 9-year olds that don't have access to full-time internet capabilities, right? Like there are new people that come in every day.
Mhm.
The point that I'm trying to make though is well, like kind of back to like the working together concept, right? People are to tie in the like people have become so far removed from how exactly another person, because we're so hyper specialized, right? We were just specialized before, now we're hyper specialized, right? Like, so a lot of the coolest things that are happening on the planet right now, only if like a handful of people really understand, what is really going on. The point I'm trying to make there is, we're disconnected from each other, and the internet is like it's a tool that has exploded so much since its inception because it is so useful to us, right? But once again, it's getting back to this like baseline programming of we're mishandling it, right? Like we don't fully understand our own capabilities. We don't fully understand. Not every human on this planet is capable of making like all of the. How do I say this?
Can I interject?
Sure.
I think you made a great point about like basically, systems of commerce becoming so complex that it's hard to understand at the individual level. And it relates to like logistics, because people had to confront like how the system really moves with all the supply chain bottlenecks and shortages and stuff, right? Like people, like I know, for example, let's use the example of toilet paper, right? Toilet paper, it might, just a random Walmart, they place an order for toilet paper months ahead of when it comes to the store. But from the consumer level, they just think, oh, they're just out of toilet paper. Like, there'll be more tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
Like at the individual level, the uneducated things are like so commerce and logistics have become so complex and globalized and stuff. But at the individual level, you basically have to teach people how it actually works. It's not like Bobby Joe made the toilet paper in 2 towns over and it came straight to the store. No, it really came from some Asian country on a boat for 2 or 3 months first, and then on a truck or on a train into the store, into the back room, then to the actual where it's at on the floor, like in the store.
I think the word you were looking for, Ben, was like faculties. And, it's faculties of like shaping your environment, the faculties of, commingling and actually like kind of integrating brains in a way and just like becoming like more like the one people kind of aspect.
Whereas
the faculties of like nurturing your young and like making them into decent people, like it's the human experience oriented stuff.
Right.
Like,
well, the selfishness has always been there, but we're losing the part where like the person, our next door neighbor, how many people really know their next door neighbors anymore, right?
Yeah.
We've lost the connection that like the person next to you may not directly like influence your life, but you should probably be nice to them, because in larger society, if we aren't nice to each other, then like things break down, right?
But like you said, like originally people would have just been bartering or trading things straight up. And like in that scenario, it's obvious to know, hey, this other person is important for me as well.
But we are biologically limited, right? Like we have to be realistic about being human, as you say, right? We have a baseline program. We have DNA. We have like environmental triggers and factors, right? There's all sorts of things that go into us, right? We can talk about these theories and concepts because of the hard work that other people, like the sacrifice of generations and generations before us, is what allows us to, be having these discussions today.
It's another way to put it, I think, is with technology and communication breaking physical barriers, we have scaled up association. I saw this research that said the reason that a lot of like cities and stuff are hard to govern is because like the human brain only has the capacity to maintain like 180 like relationships with like 180 people. Like once you get past that point, it becomes like very complex. And think about how people have like thousands of Facebook friends, or thousands of Instagram followers or thousands of YouTube followers. The scalability of communities has basically surpassed like what our subconscious brain comprehend.
Absolutely, right. Once again, we're biological creatures. We have limitations, and we're working on like removing those limitations with technology, right? So maybe someday that won't be a problem, but for now, it's kind of an issue, right? And maybe sometimes we jump ahead a little too far. We're very intuitive creatures, and sometimes we know the answers before we understand the questions, and that can be we're learning through like artificial intelligence, like learning algorithms, that there's a big difference between like understanding the question and finding an answer, and finding an answer, right, without understanding the question.
It's like going through puberty. It's like you're in the process of growing up, but you're not grown up yet.
Well, something along those lines. But it's also like it's also like knowing the correct way in the forest when you have no idea why you know the correct way.
Yeah, I mean, see, this goes back to like the whole sapiosexual thing, or like why Nikola Tesla didn't have kids, or like was a virgin or whatever.
Well, I think he was an asshole for not giving the world brilliant babies, right? Like he could have just gone and porked a bunch of women and then went back to inventing and whatever, right? But instead he was selfish with his seed, and here we are, right?
Well, I mean, because it goes back to because like how much things do people really need, I think is the thing, because a lot of these things, like a lot of things, like you said, I think something you said earlier was like a lot of things on the planet people don't like understand like what's going on, or like people can't, like they don't have like the faculties to like understand like how to use whatever we have and all this shit. But like a lot of people just, they simply aren't like, they don't really want to know or like care to know like what they don't want to govern people like in a big city. Like they don't really want to know about like a supply chain, or like they don't want to know about the technology, like where the toilet paper comes from, or like how people are getting to Mars or some shit. Like a lot of people, or even back in Tesla day, how electricity worked. A lot of people they didn't care about that stuff. Not to say that it's not valuable, but it's just not every like different things are valuable to different people. I mean, it's like how so many people aren't working right now. I think a part of it is they don't there's nothing that they really want to work on. Like, but when if your family had a farm, you would work on the farm to eat. Like, but now people have food, so it's like, what are you like? Do they want to like learn about their plumbing system? Like, you know what I mean?
I see where you're coming from, but the thing is that there's a danger of having an out of sight, out of mind.
That's true.
Say, you know
That's
what I
true.
mean? Because if it unravels, then you have no other frame of reference.
That's true.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
true.
Yeah.
That's why it's important to be aware of these things at large, so you can adapt accordingly.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, I'm trying to be the voice for those people. I mean, I definitely agree with you guys, but
At the same time, like I said, those people are going, if they get, they're like, oh, I don't care about all the conflicts, this and that. They're also going to be the first people bitching when one little thing changes. Like they're just complacent. That just sounds like. I understand people want to be to a degree somewhat complacent because we live like more sedentary lifestyles and stuff now, but like it's almost like it's like civic responsibility, right? Like they said, you can't have a democracy with a bunch of dumb people who
Right.
don't care to have some level of like broader understanding and involvement.
Right. You know what is funny is like the forefathers were only asking for like well, individual responsibility, but now people, I mean, we're headed towards individual sovereignty, right? Like at the rate that we're going as a species, there will probably be a point where there are no more countries anymore. Everybody is like their own person, and they have their own sort of like rules for how you interact with them, right? And people will just choose a very like limited number of people to interact with, more or less, right?
because like that to
And
me,
the rest will be online, and the rest, like everything else, will just be done via technology somehow.
well, I mean, to me, that's always been. I think it's always been like that. Like whatever technology's on the planet, like there were always people who left and went and either like they maybe committed suicide or like they left and lived somewhere else or they did whatever. Like I don't I
Yeah.
mean we might have different technology today, but I don't think those dynamics necessarily change.
Yeah,
Like
I think
what
you're right. I think individual people just do that on their own. That's what off-gridding and homesteading is. Just making that independent choice to just do that.
But what is the incentive structure there? Like, explain to me what is the point of that ultimately?
A hedge against everything else falling apart. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, okay,
Now,
and also to get back like to one thing that you said, UA man, like you can't have you can't have everybody being an individual and like not like I don't think that's or I mean everybody is an individual, but for everyone to like only be able to move as like an agent of themselves, like without any relation, without any connection to other things unless they build that, unless they want it to be there. I don't really think that's possible. Because even in today's age, you have a lot of people who are quote unquote like they're not like they're alone for most of the day, like only kind of with their own selves, maybe like for most of the day.
Okay.
But even in that, you still have. Let me just say, even in that, you have. If a government prints money, you're still affected by that. Like your purchasing power still follows by the day. Like you don't have any say in that. Like you're connected to that no matter what. Like you know what I mean? You can't get away from certain things.
I mean, you could literally.
I do see one possibility. So you say like you don't see that this hyper individualistic world. I think about it in an allegory like this though. I've heard a really good allegory that says that, the caveman would have not been able to even imagine the world we live in. That things can develop beyond our imagination.
Of
And I
course.
do think there is one circumstance where he's ways that could kind of work, which would just be that basically machines do 99.9% of all labor. So that would be a long time from now. But
Eventually,
that's
yeah.
a hypothetical that I see.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying is that might be a world we can't even really conceive from our current perspective.
Sure, right.
In the same way that the caveman couldn't have seen people living in, air-conditioned and temperature-controlled boxes.
Right. Wouldn't they have loved that?
I mean, you don't like they made a fire. Like you don't think they tried to control the temperature of their own surroundings too? Like why would they make a fire?
No, I think they did. I'm saying that they would have loved modern technology, right? Bring a caveman in here and they would have been like, oh my gosh, this is great.
Yes, technology has scaled to a point beyond like what they would have,
Well,
their
but
chain
what they
of logic could have imagined.
Yeah.
In a sense, maybe not, but that's kind of the analogy.
Well,
I always thought that was a neat analogy.
Hold on. I want to get a sense of something with you guys because Rami has brought up this point before. I don't personally subscribe much like merit to the idea because I think some of the science behind it is still a little shaky. But I would like to ask you guys. I'll start with Morph Gamer and then James will talk to you next. What do you think your IQ is? And then I'm going to ask Rami he judged me once, and I would ask that he just refrain from giving away anything at the moment. I'm just curious, what would you rate yourself as, Morph Gamer? And then James, and then Rami, I would like to get your take on what you think their IQ levels are. And then I'll get to my point from there. Go ahead.
Okay, so I took an IQ test. I may have taken it more than once, I'm not sure, but I scored like 138, I want to say. And this was, like I said, this was like 2 years ago. So this one I'd already been smoking like every day for years. And I'd still scored above 130. It was like 135 or 138. So if you said, if we said, me sober for my whole life, may could have been like a little bit over 140 maybe.
Yeah.
Around 140 to 145, maybe, right, if I'd never done any substances. But like I said, I feel like I've always felt like it's been high enough that didn't really deflect from it.
Yeah, at a certain point, you're so far above, you can afford to lose a few points.
And, they say that people that are high IQ are more likely to have, be like depressed. So it's like, you know what I mean? I traded off.
Hold on. Normies made up the word depressed. It's actually just realism, and there's a problem with breeders that they are too optimistic. It's not that depression exists. It's that they created this idea that they're the normal ones when they're actually too optimistic. Depression is just being...
Maybe I'll reword it like this. Being high IQ can make you enough of a cynic to give you a sad or disposition. So I guess you could say, like, I traded a small portion of my IQ to feel better most of the time.
Yes.
AKA cope.
It's
not enough to matter. It's not enough to really matter. Enough that it's worth it for me.
Of course.
In my opinion.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that, Aaron Clary likes to talk about the curse of the high IQ. I have not read that book. I probably
Yeah, me either.
But one of the things it seems to me, and I've talked to Rami a lot about this, and I still want to get back to his assessment of you two, and I want to talk to James still as well. One of his assessments of, or one of my assessments of high IQ is that people who have a high IQ, generally one of their traits is having a greater like pattern recognition capability than a human being, and because of that, there are killer patterns, and so sometimes people fall into those killer patterns, and for most people, the black pill or the void, some people can avoid it, some people see that pattern and like see how that plays out, and it goes directly to like the center of the void, right? The center of black pill, which at a certain point, Rip Renegade number one, right? Like really smart guy, he saw how this played out. Basically, he saw the human condition, and he said, no, not really interested in playing that game, right? Now, the unfortunate part is being human is partially about being irrational, right? Like, you're a human being. It's like, accept that you have some part of your brains that you can't fully control, right? Now, you can do more. It's like, if monks have anything to say about it, right? Like, you can do a great deal as far as like taming the inner beast, so to speak, right? The ape. But it's always going to be there, and whether or not you're fighting it or working with it is kind of the choice, right? It may never be peace until we learn to move on from our biological like shackles, so to speak.
Right. I don't think that's the thing. And I don't think there's shackles either.
Well, I mean, I said so to speak. I mean, I was waxing a little poetic there.
That's doomsday. That's not poetry. That's doomsday.
He's not saying we could become indestructible, but that we could sustain ourselves in a certain health ad infinitum, right? As long as we don't get shot or stabbed to death.
Well, we're getting to the point where we can alter our own DNA, which will give us new possibilities and modes of existence. Maybe we'll have new senses in the future, right? You want to see infrared? We'll make you see infrared, right? You know, that sort of thing. Or, you know, we have Neuralink, right? Who's to say that we don't come up with some like mechanical or electronic like mode of existence for the human condition?
And that goes back to what I said about the caveman analogy, that's just such a leap because technology is exponential. It's just such a leap. It's a leap that we kind of like don't even really have a frame of reference for.
No, hold on. You say that. Hold on. You say that. But we're working in that direction right now. Like, that's actively being worked on. So to say that we have zero frame of reference is not actually true anymore. Okay.
So the sourcing of these frames of reference has changed. So it's like we've gone from like listening to old people in 150 count village to, you know, random people we never dreamed we would have spoken of, you know, talking their jive on YouTube. And that coincides with the elements which cultivate the human soul. It's not going to be sweet things. It's going to be bitter things. Those bitter things have to be there to give our existence substance.
To appreciate the sweet things?
The default, like the Buddhists say, the default of life is suffering.
See, I don't agree with that either. I just think there's both, honestly. I don't think, like, just because there's bad doesn't mean, like, it's all bad, though. Like, I just think there's both.
Well, we got off the tangent. Are we going to go back to the high So when are we going to start with the questions?
Oh yeah, that's true.
I mean, we don't have to. We don't have to go there. I mean, I have about 45 minutes of recording now. Like, we don't necessarily have to go through all of the questions or anything. I mean,
Well, let's bring up some of the questions. Why not tie it in?
I like number 7.
Okay, well, let's start with.
I came up with it, but I also really like it.
Well, since Rami's recording, do you want to share with all 90-something people who will watch this what you think your IQ is, and then maybe we should get Rami's opinion on this?
Sure. I mean, like I could have. I've had opportunities in which I could have given my IQ test, but for me, I feel like putting a certain number on it kind of diminishes the subjective understanding of one's faculties, which could
Understood.
be related to IQ. So
Understood, and enough said.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. If I gave myself, an IQ of 105, for example, like, okay, I'm factoring conditions of how effective is my problem solving, what skills have been made evident to me on this journey so far. But
certainly,
yeah. I mean, to me, it's
IQ is situational. It seems to me, or like expertise or competence has a lot to do with. More to do with the human condition than just purely IQ or like your ability to pattern recognize or solve complex equations.
At the same time, there's still an average range that's considered average for IQ, and then there's like for example, they consider like people who get a bachelor's degree to have an IQ of around 120, basically as an average.
Completely false. Like
nowadays, probably not as much because the structure to give out loans so freely from too much government intervention is around. But if you were going off true merit of their performance in school before, like if you were really fully evaluating them, I guess. I don't know, maybe because I guess there's economic factors too, like being able to afford it. But you can be smart enough but not really be able to afford it as well. So that's a bit tough.
Oh yeah, no, certainly. I mean, I imagine there's a lot of very, very smart people in a lot of very, very rough spots right now, right? Like they should be saving our planet, and instead they're trying to figure out where their next meal is coming from, right? And they've been brainwashed into thinking that they need something in life from someone.
Well, there's plenty of studies that show that if you're in a survival situation, it literally hurts your cognition. It can hurt your IQ by as much as 10 points.
If you're
constantly in a state of survival.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. If you're in survival mode all the time, your body reacts negatively, and your cognition, your cognition will.
And the stress, basically.
Well, actually, yeah. Well, like cortisol, we were kind of talking about that.
Because the stress quite literally raises the cortisol in your body.
Yeah.
Well, aside from the stresses of life, I do believe there is going to be this base reference of capacitance in regards to like what you're capable of, depending on like your genetic constitution. I mean, everyone's going to have some high attributes of mental prowess, and so we're going to have, but at the same time they will have a degree of physical prowess. That balance is going to depend on the constitution and what their forefathers had to persevere through their lineage up until this point.
Sure. Yeah, there's all sort of.
I don't want to let that point go.
Yeah, there's all sort of like hereditary things, like even diseases, right? So and pain, right? Like being in pain through no fault of your own in life, and being like constantly subjected to that kind of thing, I imagine is something that would lower IQ as well, right?
Right.
You just can't concentrate, right? So anyway, the point I was trying to make is it's a very relative thing, and it's a very like I consider IQ like pseudoscience. It's not really like a good test. It's just sort of a vague understanding of where a person might land in a certain set of like scenarios, right? Like under certain conditions, certain scenarios, they would probably perform this well, you know. Or
I've always thought of IQ because they say it has to do with the speed of things you can process with your brain, and like you said, also pattern recognition. I think it kind of has to do with like just how prone you are and how quick you can learn and new information, or make conclusions about information
that you processing speed.
Yeah, like your ability to you can discern things, or maybe come to some conclusion quicker, given the same information as compared to someone else.
Okay. And
like for example, being a homicide detective would obviously require being high IQ.
Well, it would also understanding like human psychology and a bunch of other things, right? And a drive and motivation, that sort of thing, right?
But I'm saying I feel like that's a good, to a degree, being able to take details in quicker than other people and make conclusions or piece things together, process things, piece them bits of information together quicker, or come to conclusions quicker, etc.
Now, does that make? I mean, with computers these days, that used to be a relatively sought after trait in a human being. I don't think that. I think we're getting away from that more and more because we're seeing kind of as the internet is more like history, right? Like the internet never forgets, right? Mm-hmm. So its greatest, like fundamentally, the internet is about like retaining information, and what we're seeing more and more of is people who made gut instinct decisions of like for our planet, like our world leaders, they failed, right? Like they screwed up somehow, rather on a grand scale, let's say.
I think the internet, it's like sharing information. I think like it's stored because of
storing, sure, yeah,
right. Yeah, I mean, and then even like the thing is, these world leaders and shit, like it's basically become at this point, it's like a club for themselves. Like that's part of the reason why, like I was saying earlier,
like
that people didn't. Yeah, that people didn't. They didn't. A lot of people, they don't care about what like leaders are doing. Like they might care about what their like sister thinks about politics, which is why they went out to vote, which is why so many people went out to vote in the last election. But do they really care? Like look at what happened when like what were they, like the Panama Papers, or I forgot what the recent ones were. When that came out, people didn't really give a shit about that because it's not, they don't care about what those leaders are doing. Like they don't really, like they care about what their friend thinks about what like Trump said or something, you know what I mean? Yeah. But they don't care about like like they don't care, like because it's just not it's just not as like really relevant to them immediately. So I can't even blame people for that. I do think people that try to be more aware of certain things, those people should, just because they care, people should look, people who want to know information should look to those people that care more than they look to like their friend, for example, like who doesn't give a shit. But I can't necessarily blame a person for like not really caring, because it's just a club at this point. Like they're not trying to let other people in, like those quote unquote leaders, and that's why people don't even really see them as leaders. that's why so little people pay attention to I don't know, like cable news or something, for example, because they don't
You said
give a
people
shit.
were more politically involved, right?
People they voted more. They're more politically involved, and they voted more in the last election because they were concerned about what their friend or like what their mom or sister or something thought about what Trump said or some other bullshit like that. They didn't actually care about the abstract issue most of the time. Like they just cared about what their friend said about it.
Interesting.
Like, so that's why people are getting more political, because it's affecting people more personally, because the downstream effects of those decisions are like affecting whoever they're close to. But the actual hardcore decisions, like for example, I posted on Facebook a C-SPAN like an interview on C-SPAN where Rand Paul was grilling Dr. Fauci about gain of function research. Posted it on Facebook. Nobody gave a damn about that. And that is like the crux of a huge issue in America right now, but nobody cared about that. But people did care about how you felt about COVID lockdowns. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Hang on. I think these guys have something to say. So let's get back to that, because I think current events are very important. We should get back to current events at some point, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just using that as an example of like the phenomenon I was talking
I'll
about.
just quickly add, it's that old saying, it's the economy, stupid. And I mean that kind of ties back with that kind of ties back with like a more nationalist, like populist kind of, where it's just like everyone focuses on their own kind and make sure everything in their own land is accounted for, and they're like as self-sufficient as possible. And someone that I listened to previously brought that up in a sense that like globalism is starting to die with all these like supply chain fuck ups and everything. It's just like people are really starting to question the validity of like such interconnected, means of trade and supporting each other. It's like it doesn't always work. If one cog fails, then everything else goes to shit.
It's like I said before, out of sight, out of mind, right? When things are complex, as long as it works. Me, as the regular Joe, I don't really care, right? To know why. I just want it to work. I just want to be able to show up to the store and everything I want, I buy. I go home. Simple.
Yeah.
But the reality is that nationalism and globalism are always at odds, whether people want to realize it or not.
Yeah.
Well, it's not just that. We're also talking about, a little bit about like privatism versus like government, I guess, to some extent.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to get out for a second.
That's
do we want to talk about some of the questions now, though?
Yeah. We definitely should. Hold on. I want to ask an important question. How soon, you guys? And you know what I mean. How soon? How much time do you think people have?
In the U.S.?
Yeah, give us like a date, right? Like, give us months, years. What are you talking?
I think in a kind of ironically, how studies usually can't be extremely accurate. I think ironically the MIT study that says 2040, honestly, I would say by 2040, I think things will have gone to complete crap. I would say.
That's what I estimate, and I came to that conclusion independently. I didn't know about that study, and now I have to look into it.
Yeah, just the way I see things, trajectory, knowing what I know, I say we can't sustain this for another generation, which could be about 20 years. Absolutely no way. I mean, everything, the way we're doing, the way we, have economics, the way the genders are interacting, something will have to give.
Well, it's the issue with 20 years is it's just going to get progressively worse and worse until it's mayhem, right? Like until it's complete tribalism and everybody for themselves. Now hold on. Nobody survives that unscathed. Everybody realizes that, right? Like the choice that's being made by young men today is we're going back. We're giving up on technology, all the cool things we could have if we can just continue on this trend, and we go that towards keeping jobs together, keeping the infrastructure alive, keeping supply chains going. If we can just survive for another 20 years or so, we'll have some really cool technology that we could all share and enjoy. But a lot of young men are instead deciding to go the farmstead route and think that they're going to survive on their own somehow, not survive alone without any help from any outside influence or sources at some point, right? And hope that they don't get marauded on, hope that the elements don't take them out, hope that their own stupidity or their own survival knowledge is sufficient enough to last for however long that they expect to survive alone in the wilderness, right? We have a large section of young men who are kind of being sold on the idea that leaving society is a good idea, and some of them are choosing the route of going solitude completely.
I think that most of them think that they're going to just be able to survive the fall. I think most are just planning to survive the transition to complete fallout and then recoup after that with other people.
Now, what is that?
In terms of surviving, the collapse of food supply chains and infrastructure,
right?
And then whenever that's done, pick up the pieces, because that's really, I don't really know another way to approach it.
How do you reboot society like that? Right? What does that even look like? What is the transition? Because
we don't really know.
This is going to be the unimaginably difficult because nobody knows what this looks like when we go. How far back do we really regress?
It's already happening to me. That 2040 date, to me, it's already happening. I already think we've already gotten to the point of where it's just gotten so bad that it's really not, that it's just ridiculous. You've already gotten to the point where families have gotten broken up over this stuff. I don't think it really gets worse. We've already lost a good amount of knowledge about technology. I think in the last generation. Dude, I was watching this Louis Rossmann video. Okay, wait, let me just say this. I was watching this Louis Rossmann video yesterday about he had this, I don't know what the device was. It was some kind of camera where he had the whole packaging for it, and then there was a super detailed there's a super detailed manual with a map of all the parts and what they did. Literally, it was so detailed. Everything was there, where everything is, how you fix it, how you can take it apart, put it back together, and all this stuff. Even theories about the function of those parts in a basic manual for some camera. And it was from 1995. But if you take a camera today, they have none of that in the packaging. They don't have any of that. All of that detailed shit. They don't have any of that because of things they say they don't want to give their competition all that knowledge. They say it's too dangerous for people to have that information. They say a bunch of bogus stuff, and then they don't put that same level of detail into a product packaging today like they used to. That's already lost technology right there. That's lost knowledge. I mean, I don't know if we lose technology per se, but that's lost knowledge though. We've already, that's from 1995. I'd say we've already gotten there. And there's already none really.
There's this idea idea of like garbage collection, right, in coding, and I think society is finally experiencing a moment where we've got to decide what garbage collection really means on a societal level, right?
Dude, even look at that. Even many programmers today don't even know what garbage collection is because all of these languages do it for them. Like that's this. It's the same concept. It's lost knowledge, dude. Like it's already happening. Yeah, I mean,
To an extent, yes.
yeah,
yes.
it's already happening in my opinion. There's already been so many things. Like people used to know how their car worked when they bought it. Like they used to know how it worked, like how to do basic repairs and all that shit. Nowadays, people don't know that. You could say they've
so
gotten more
it's a
complex, whatever.
microcontroller. Most of cars today are like run by microcontrollers.
Exactly.
Vehicles are built into electric vehicles, which are just like streamlined electric vehicles, right? And a lot less moving parts, a lot less stuff, right? So electric cars are really going to change the game, especially when they figure out better battery technology a little bit more.
Yeah, because I mean, you could argue whether it's progression or regression in technology. Like I don't think that's more complex than what we used to have. I don't think it's more. I think it's different, but I don't think it's more complex. Like I don't think our technology is necessarily getting more complex right now. Like I think it's different. Like we're creating different things, but I don't think it's more complex.
I don't think that's true. I think, how much do you guys research like the newest technologies, the newest physics, mathematics, astronomy, right? That's right.
Yeah,
The
study of the
stars, right?
stars.
The
Yeah.
galaxy. Yeah. How much you guys keep? Well, I will say abreast of that situation.
The only new
I
technology.
used to. Yeah, I really don't keep up with that stuff.
Okay. That's the bright side, guys. Like, we've talked. Okay, well, I want to talk about incentives, right? Like, let's get to number 7. You guys have all wanted to talk about it. Let's finally get there, right? 2.5 hours later.
All right, do you want to read it in like a question format?
Well,
I'll let the recording.
Do the
I can.
honors there, or whoever picked it, I guess, would read it, right?
Okay, so the topic, I guess, what male incentives to contribute to society exist that aren't in the broader conversation? Like I said, like having a family structure. Like basically, what are the reasons besides selfish reasons that men do the hard jobs and that sort of thing, and the dangerous jobs that it doesn't really get talked about, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, and you're talking about like children, and then actually having
having a provision. Because the reality is, most guys, if they're just single guys, they can get by on very little if they want to.
This is true.
And I think Aaron Clary brought that up as a good point. You know, if you have just a bunch of single dudes, they'll just do, and they don't have anything else really to, no other outside incentives. They'll sit around. However, they'll contribute as little as they can and just chill.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. You work as little as possible to survive as long as possible.
You could say that's amoral relative to the environment, but if you think about the macro level impact that could happen to the overall economy, because our economy just doesn't work under that assumption now, right? Like you have guys putting in a lot of hours, because they have a family and that sort of thing, or they have other obligations.
Well, it's that whole trope of like, I worked so hard, like I worked 60 hours this week, right? Like I'm such a man.
Right, I worked 60 hours this week so the family could go to Disneyland.
Yeah, that's not there anymore.
Well, that obligation also translates into more consumption, right? Less hoarding of wealth.
Wait, hold on. I'll be right back. I'll be back.
Right, it keeps the velocity. That affects the overall velocity of money in the economy. How fast money moves in the economy. Some of those incentives.
Sure, you're right. With more people, there are more possibilities. With less people, there are less possibilities. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I am on the side of having more possibilities and trying to figure out the details there than the reverse.
I think that for the past 100 years, we've been witnessing the erosion of where this rite of passage fits into, depending on any given culture that you want to put out there. There's always this rite of passage that men have to go through in order to cultivate this archetype. The male typically is the archetype of the propagator. He brings about children. He brings about meaning through the paternal instinct. He propagates opportunities for his clansmen to thrive. So,
I was gonna say, like you said, in tribes, right? Usually at an early age, right? Most boys go through some sort of ritual to symbolize going from boy to man. In the West, that would be, quote unquote, manning up, right? Have a family, provide for said family. But that's just becoming murkier, literally, by the day.
The incentives are lost there.
Right, exactly.
It's the stuff of how civilizations form. I mean, you have to associate yourself with this archetype in order to give yourself the propulsion.
Absolutely.
People have acted to have brought us to this point.
Right. But this is what you were talking about earlier. Without God, you were asking, what do? We created ourselves, damn it. Like, we hold ourselves to a higher standard. That's what our forefathers did. That's how they created this country.
Yeah, they believed that they had a narrative to share with the rest of the world as to how good they believe society or civilization can become.
Shouldn't we be sharing that narrative with other people? And shouldn't we be trying to do our best to alter our own narrative to be in line with reality and with success as much as possible? Success.
That's what the hero's journey is all about. I mean, think about it, any kind of favorite movie that everyone has seen growing up. That basically encapsulates that journey. Well, it's literally who we are, and that's why we love you so much.
Well, hold on. Now, Jordan Peterson would call this the hero's journey, but what we're referring to is sort of like the Messiah journey and like the biblical and like religious roots of this, right? Like, this is inborn in people for our like whole history, right? We've been writing about this since like Oedipus Rex or whatever. I don't know, whatever. Like the first,
the Odyssey.
The Odyssey, yeah, whatever that one. Thank you. So this has been a part of our culture, like our inheritance as men for a long, long time, right? And we've, in a gynocentric society, so to speak, which it seems more and more it does, like, it is that way, it is happening, and it's more poignant in some cases and then less so in others, right? Like, some people are kind of spared some of the sting of it, and then some people are living that every day, and like, I don't know how they're surviving. Like, I don't know how they live, I don't know how they survive. And sometimes, guys, the hard part about all this is sometimes as soon as somebody knows something, it clicks with them and they see that pattern and they recognize it. that's an instant like shutdown for them, right? And they don't even listen to anything else that might counteract that. So we have to be careful with what we say to some extent, right? It's not a matter of like being told whether or not we can say certain things or certain topics. It's about how we approach it and who we're trying to reach, right? Like if we're sending out a message to other people and we're talking to each other, I would like to keep the conversation like uplifting and like try to keep the understanding that we're all trying our best here, right? So if any of us make a mistake, we say something a wrong way, give people the benefit of the doubt, right? Like maybe they didn't mean it in the worst possible way that you can imagine. You know what I mean?
I mean, we wouldn't be here if we didn't want to come to some sort of degree of solutions or not.
Right. Okay, good.
Can I kind of bring us back to the talking about the details of the question?
Yeah, of course.
And so we're talking about it can like I said, so some of the points about number 7, let's say, is single men versus married men. Basically, their spending habits, their productive work habits, right?
Right.
Those are basically some of the key things. But also, the social conventions, women buzzing their hair or, getting gauges, just, you literally have some social press, some social ideas to literally be unattractive, right? To not even appeal to men.
That's correct. Why do you
hurting.
think so many people are overweight? So many women that when they know
that's what I was getting to. Is like the desirability of women. A lot of guys say, I'm going to work hard to come home to a woman who weighs more than me, and they don't think that's worth it. They don't feel like they're getting a fair draw for their contribution.
Sure. That's understandable. Especially okay. The biological drive for men to like procreate
with women,
or at least to try, right?
Right.
Is quite. It is a driving force, right? Like we can't ignore the fact that testosterone exists and that it runs high, especially in the 20s. And at my age, I can tell you it doesn't get any better, right? It's still a factor, but it's like you said, earlier I used to fight it, and now I just work with it, right?
Right.
So back to this subject here. Okay. So which way do you guys want to take this? Do you want to take it technology side, which is like we're creating technology for ourselves, such as fembots, right? Welcome to the 2020. There are actually, pretty realistic looking fembots out there, and they're only going to get better because people are pumping serious money into it, right?
Right. The market's growing. They're only going, competition will take hold, and they'll become cheaper and better.
Right, and maybe
like into the competitive market.
And maybe Fatal Foxy can share a little on that about his experience in that area in just a moment. And then the other side of this would be basically like we have to figure out how to get women back on track, which would be like a somewhat delicate conversation. But if you guys really want to, get on the ban list here, let's go, right?
Let me say, bots, I don't know. I feel like those would be iffy if those actually have a huge impact. But to me, I think what would be huge, if we're talking about this question in terms of technology, would be, like you mentioned earlier, which is artificial wombs. Artificial wombs would basically essentially be the male equivalent of the pill, right? In the same way.
No, we won't need them. We'll do something like cloning, basically, and then we'll fix our own DNA, more or less. Like everybody, from now on, our lineage will be us. we'll figure out DNA, we'll figure out cloning, we'll clone our own selves, we'll fix whatever we don't like about ourselves, and our next iteration will be like we'll either raise them or we'll have like Neuralink and we'll like upload our consciousness. So we'll probably figure something like that out.
Well, I just meant if we had the hypothetical that we could take an egg, right, and incubate it and bring it to term without using a woman's body, to me it kind of seems like the equivalent of the kind of power that women have in terms of being able to use the pill, right? Because they can use the pill to bypass. Like we would basically phase out the symbiotic relationship.
Well, we would no longer require their services to continue the human population, which would change the dynamic drastically right there. First.
Right.
And then secondly, if we create a substitute for our needs, so to speak, that suit us better than them, then they would have to figure out some other means of survival, right?
Do you guys really? So you guys, I mean, we're talking about incentives to make people like as like positive incentives. You really think those are going to be positive incentives? Like what I see from that, if those technologies are able to eventually exist, which I'm like on the fence about if they will exist, but let's just assume that they do. I feel like I mean, sure, like there's a lot of things like people have like alchemists, they were working for like centuries on trying to like make the elixir of like I forgot like what is it like I forgot what they called like the like making you live forever like the elixir of something and they never got it.
That's a little bit of a false analogy, but yeah, the elixir of life or the philosopher's stone is usually
alchemists were working on it forever, man. Like humans always work on shit. But like let's just assume that they get it though. Like I think people's incentives to like contribute to society and even to live in general are gonna plummet. I don't think it's gonna be a positive thing.
I was just speaking holistically, good and bad, about the male incentives.
Well, hold on. What about a society where cannabis is legal and so are other psychedelic substances?
I've had this discussion with Ronnie before. There could be a compromise, if you will, which would basically be legalizing prostitution and making it. And the caveat, but you have to have a caveat because, see, right now it's very limited, right, in certain locations. So you have very high prices. If you made it a competitive field, right, where both sides get a good deal, right, you make it more competitive and more available, that would have to be part of it too, in my opinion.
Well, hold on. What do you guys think about dual societies, like a male, like separated society? Because they used to do that in the past, right? Like the men used to do their things. What do you think on like a global like scale? Theoretically, everybody on the entire planet could fit into the United States, right? Technically, if it's shoulder to shoulder, it could be like Texas, right? Like or some city, it's like Dallas, Texas, or whatever. Like shoulder to shoulder, everybody could fit into Dallas, Texas. I think something like that. Anyway, or all of our molecules into a sugar cube if we took all the space out. Anyway, point being, if we moved everybody to one centralized location, and like we sort of sorted ourselves out there, we would have to build the infrastructure, right? But like, it would just be like more like vacation to go anywhere else in the world. You know what I mean? That sort of thing.
Okay. Oh, sorry, my mic went.
The facet of gender segregation, which is come about through various conservative communities. Like, let's take the Amish for example. I know it's not like to the degree we're implying, but I don't think it would take a solid line of males on this side, females on the other side. I think that's just naturally something that would occur in a balanced society. And then with mentioning that whole separatist movement, that kind of led me back to kind of the faction of the United States kind of dividing itself into sub-nation states in the future.
Balkanization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. You think our states will break?
I think it'll happen.
It's already starting to happen. I mean, take into consideration this
politically, it's already happening. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But I was going to say that I agree with you in a balanced society, because the male and female experience is just inherently different, that you would have male and female spaces. Like, you would have just some natural gender segregation.
Certainly. And the fact that we have to go underground and we could be shut down at any, they could shut down Discord at any time, right?
Right.
So it speaks to our society right now, unfortunately, that we have to be here in this situation, and these are not already being handled by our representatives. That we have to even talk about some of these things is sort of a
because I think it's
situation. But welcome to 2021, guys. Right? Like we all play a role in what we do. So here we are.
because like I said, it's to be honest, I think it's already happening. I don't know if we're gonna balkanize. To be honest, I don't think balkanization is gonna happen, because the majority of our society is just too, like, let's just be honest, like, too fat and lazy to like really have that happen. Like, so because you're gonna have to have like basically people prepared for war in order for that to happen, and there's such a small amount of people are prepared for war. So I don't think balkanization is gonna truly happen. But like, what I do think is already happening now is like, we're like taking things into your own hands, like being like just your brain, like, to start with, and then after that your own sources of food and water and things like that. Like, I think that's what's probably gonna happen, and then the correction will happen as that's happening. Like, I don't know if we're gonna even really need like waifus and shit like that, like technology, to really bridge the gap, because I think people will start. Yeah, I don't know. Like, maybe that stuff, people are going to be still working on that and all that, but I don't know if it's going to be necessary. Like, I already see the change happening. Like I was saying a a couple of chats ago, like, young women in the countryside are already looking at, like, well, they're looking for dudes. Like, they're already looking, like, young chicks, like, dude, chicks in like high school. I don't know if it's just because like of biology or whatever, or like if they really understand like the social nature of like what's going on now, but it's not as if women right now are like swimming in a bunch of opportunities themselves, because like MGTOW is kind of working. Dudes are leaving, and with that, I think that's going to bring about the correction. Like, I don't know if we're going to need much.
Hold on. So anecdotal evidence here. A case in point, and I won't bring up anything other than I know a person. She is relatively attractive, relatively young, and she probably could have a lot more options in her life. She has settled on a man who has 2 children already with another woman, but she apparently she thinks that he is her best option, and she lives in kind of a rural area. I was a little taken aback at the time, and I think it's taken me until basically this moment to unpack that and kind of realize what that means for society. That a young woman like that would just she's taking anybody who like basically will be good to her, because that's how like desperate she is. And it's a man with 2 young boys that are like, and a wife that probably hates him or like has some problem with him. right? With the way divorces go these days, and apparently he has some qualities and qualifications that she likes about him.
Exactly, because he showed any amount of interest. Like to think a lot of these people on the internet, they think that women are swimming in options and all this shit. That's just not, it's not true. Like they're not swimming in options. Like to be honest, women are they see their elders, dude. You think they're happy to end up like like how many of their elders are pretty much ending up right now? Like they see that shit too, just like we're seeing it. They see that too.
Just to have a little laugh, I heard the toilet flush in the background.
Oh,
That might be my chair.
I'm so glad you were in tune so much that you wanted to listen to every word while you were going.
No, I think that was my chair creaking.
Oh, was it? Oh, okay, never mind.
I'm in a desk. Yeah, I'm in a desk chair, and it makes a noise when it spins sometimes.
Oh, okay. I thought I heard the toilet flushing in the background. Okay,
it's a little spicy there, huh?
Yeah, right. All right. Sorry, I didn't mean to detract from what we were talking about.
But I think you made a good point about how like general trends towards people having less friends and being more isolated.
exactly.
That makes dudes more likely to withdraw too.
Yeah.
Sure, right. Well, how do you create a bond with people who don't think like you, right?
Well, because even you can, but when it's so, because it's just when it's just, the thing is, dudes, like they're just, once they start regaining their purchasing power, to me it's only a matter of time. Like once
How
they
much time
sit
do you
down.
think? Well, Morph Gamer said 20 years. How much time do you think?
I don't think it's going to be up to 20.
Well,
I mean, I think
really, we're about to start in 2020. It's almost 2022, so I'm saying 18 years.
Well, right. Well, yeah. As of 2020, yes, I understand.
I just think that might be when the new standard's normalized to me. I think by 2040 the new standard might be normalized.
I
Like
think it'll only take two decades. Well, 18 years now. So like approximately 8 more years to 16 more years, somewhere around there. Where and I'm assuming a 2-year time frame for like normalization, maybe 1-year time frame for normalization. But somewhere in there, we turn things around so far that things are right back on track, and like we're back to producing again in the U.S. across the planet. Nobody's threatening anybody, and like times are good again for like more and more people all the time.
well, I don't know about the rest of the world. Like for the United States, I think, yeah, I think by how many people will be producing, I'm not sure. Like, but I think we're gonna get back on the path of making more sense within, because I honestly think we're at the very last stages of the past 3 or so decades of like the gynocentric society, whatever you want to call it, the service sector economy, whatever it is. I think we're seeing a lot of that stuff collapse because just simply due to people's, like, their lack of interest in sustaining that way of life. Like even prior to COVID, it was collapsing, but then COVID accelerated it a bunch. And then things are going to get worse like within the next few years. But even while things are getting worse, you're going to have people who start the reversal, like kind of like how we're doing. You already
Always, some
have,
things will get worse and some things will get better, right?
yeah,
Always.
yeah, you could, yeah. Like I think things are, it's going to be pretty bleak for a little bit, but that's as, because it's going to take people like us, like the young men who have already just said no to that old way of doing shit. It's not like, I mean, if we don't kill ourselves, which some of us have Like rest in peace, Renegade number one. Like some of us have, but the ones that don't, we're if we're still to live on this planet in this country, we're gonna be trying new like different shit all the time. Like we're doing now, for example, posting this on YouTube. After a while, we're gonna get our footing, and as we get our footing, we're just gonna keep building the shit that we want. And you know, I think once people start building, like more and more people, because there are already people building now, more and more people are gonna build once they kind of come to the similar realization as us, or like whatever realization they come to. So I don't like once as people start building, I don't think it's gonna take too long. Like it's not gonna be perfect in 40 years or 20 years or whatever. But I think it's gonna be like I think we're gonna be back on track though. I don't think it's gonna take
It's
that
funny
long.
that you say that because I was reading the Sandman video, and he was talking about how like that apparently he heard a story of like young high school kids basically guys forming like underground MGTOW groups,
Hmm.
like basically MGTOW nightclubs. Apparently that's
Yeah,
happening with the younger generations.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
not
no, there's no
surprised
doubt. That was
because
happening back. You guys didn't do that?
No, I only had one friend who I introduced to like adult kind of stuff. I only have like one friend in real life I can talk to about like these sorts of topics.
High school was very different for me, I think, than the average American male these days, or at least like the past decade or so.
Things have progressed so quick. Like Tinder was like just coming out when I was in high school. But these social problems hadn't really accelerated yet.
Yeah, because
Quite the degree.
out when like 2000,
2012. That's when I was in like ninth grade. Like I was
right.
like social media was new back then. You know, those things have amplified a lot of things.
Yeah. That's true. That's true. I well, just as an aside, I missed a lot of things. So if I miss some sort of cultural reference, I may ask you to enlighten me a little bit, or give me a reference or whatever.
No problem.
I've become aware over time that I missed a few things based on my upbringing. Right, I was maybe sheltered, maybe not sheltered in some ways. So anyway, okay, so I want to hear what Fatal Foxy has to say.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say I needed to key out in about 10 minutes because I gotta kind of just sort of wake up a little early tomorrow. But I did want to. You did mention the whole the love dolls or whatever.
Yeah.
I figure like if there was something you wanted me to add on to that, that'd probably be like my icing on the cake for you.
Sure. Sure.
Kind of like what aspect of time to have a prior conversation do you want me to expound on?
What would your ideal incentive be? Like if you could have what you want in that, and that would help you want to like work hard, produce, like sweat, labor, suffer a little bit. What are you willing to suffer for? What would you want to see, and what would be lifelike enough or not lifelike enough, or whatever you want, what would be enough for you? So far it's been what you have currently, but do you want to upgrade, and how far do you want to upgrade is the question.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I kind of dabbled on this through watching an anime called Chobits. I don't know if any of you guys seen it, but it's pretty much this like alternate present where you have these like humanoid cyborgs that assist humanity in every sort of facet of life.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, running a restaurant or just like fulfilling roles as a companion.
Right.
And
like Japanese are working on. Well, they invented it, obviously, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, they've really kind of capitalized on that sort of perspective as to like creating our own companions. I mean, every opposing culture, like media, has sort of elaborated on this. I mean, in the more Western perspective, you had Metropolis, so
sure.
That in itself is an argument. I was just like, can man create something in their own image that would help kind of like fill that archetypical hole in their lives that every sort of person, male or female, craves for. In my
expand on that just
situation. Sorry.
Expand on that idea just a little bit. That archetype.
Well, yeah, it's like if you have the patience for kind of the spontaneity of another person in terms of like their faults or something, then you're probably going to side with a human.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I see. Yeah.
But if you're not someone who's privy to that,
you like the structure more. You like the certainty of who the person you're talking to is or like dealing with is.
Yeah, I mean, I've had like a number of, I guess you could say, girlfriends. One of them that I've been intimate with, but in all actuality, like I have figured out up until this point that I don't have, the sort of patience to deal with that spontaneity. I mean, I don't know if that's going to tie into like sort of the misanthropic limelight, because I'm not saying that in terms of like a malevolence towards their existence, but the way that I'm wired to kind of persevere through life, I don't have the room for that. And I reckon that other people feel the same way, which is why they tend to go towards the love doll route. They need that kind of physical presence, but without those drawbacks that I'm elaborating on.
Sure, right. The drawbacks of having a human brain on the other end, right?
Right. It's like if you don't have the tolerance, to kind of let someone take part in taking the helm, then it's not going to work out. I think it takes a very, very well-established kind of ideology to look into that and be real with themselves in that regard.
Well, now hold on. So once upon a time, it was you had the helm and somebody was supporting you, right? Like looking after your interests, like incentive. Do you guys want children? Do you want clones? Do you, like if you were provided by the government a Chad's child, we know it's not your kid, but like it's your kid, right? Like you can raise them, like they're your kid, your dad. If you're raising them, would you want to do that if you had time to do that and pursue like a career, right?
Or if that were part of your constitution, then that would be something you're willing to do. It's like, okay, I'm willing to apply this propagative instinct of mine towards rearing offspring.
Is that something that you guys are interested in?
I mean, me personally.
Particularly, no.
Same.
I'm not in no yellow brick road towards that anytime soon. I have to say that for myself. So that's how I'm able to talk about those things.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. The whole bot thing doesn't really appeal to me. Personally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you be down to raise another guy's kid? Morph Gamer.
Oh, hell no. I'd rather not have any. I would rather have not raise another person. Unless I just, I was blessed with resources, like, got lucky and had a very, very good career, and the child was just, like, living in an abusive situation, maybe. Like, the circumstances were like, dire, maybe.
Well, hold on.
Now,
Now, hold on. the entirety of the human race has been based upon the idea that men have a very strong desire to like propagate themselves, and biologically they do it through DNA. But with sapios, I think they do it with like mental structure, which is an entirely different game. But it's about like raising the next generation and like passing on the torch. Now these days we're getting the option of maybe like just keeping the torch forever, right? Like Dark Souls style. The Forever Fire, whatever that king is. But the point that I'm trying to make here is like, what is that drive, right? Like, what is the drive to have a family and like have some continuity? Is it necessarily to propagate your own DNA, or is it so that your ideas, like who you are, like they're like that child is a little bit of you. Maybe it's not your DNA, but if you raise them, they're like a mini you, right?
Okay, so you're saying you can impression them and shape them accordingly. Still, that's what you're saying.
Exactly.
Mentorship. Yeah, it's a mentorship.
Well, right. But like traditionally, men have looked for that for some reason, right? Why else would they want to reproduce and deal with kids if they got nothing out of it, right? Like the fact of the matter is, if it's not your DNA, how big of a deal is that really if you have like raised that kid to be your child, right? Like think like you do. They're like mini yous, and you raised them that way. If you were secure enough by the government somehow, or you got resources somehow, and you were still able to pursue like hobbies and find a meaningful life, and you had to do some work, right? Like a little bit of work here and there. Is that something that you guys that would help continue the human population long enough for us to discover other ways to like prolong our lives, right? Like DNA and fix our telomeres and all that crap, right?
I think.
Is that a hit you guys are willing to make, or is that like, oh, that would be kind of cool? Like maybe that could be an adventure, like get a little kid to like have fun with, right? And like I get to raise this little human, right?
Dude, raising a kid's hard as fuck.
It goes back to my kind of point on the sand through, because like still at the end of the day, your subconscious still wants its own version of that.
You think that would be a cope to say something like that?
I don't think it's a cope. I think it's just recognizing that, like I said, we're not fully above our subconscious condition.
Okay, all right. Just so
even though you know you're having a net impact, like your subconscious mind is still like, damn, I'm not passing on my gene. Still, like regardless, like there's still going to be that like internal conflict.
Now, some people get over that. So you're saying
usually those people at least have things like they have nephews and nieces and stuff that still share like some of their DNA.
Yeah,
right? That's why you have like
you need that
the
tribe.
only aunt or uncle.
Yeah, you
exactly.
need that
like
tribe.
They still carry some of your genetic information, so that's like that's called kinship, like passing on DNA through kinship.
Sure.
Because
I'm not saying necessarily tribe.
Before I go is, I was gonna say the last thing I'll say before I have to go is that everyone who's speaking in this group right now is still relatively early on their journey, so it's like who knows how strong that drive is going to be for us to want to propagate our beings, our experiences, what we have to give to the world onto another person. For me, I'm only 28 right now, and I'm still working on figuring things out. So it's just like, in terms of like a bandwidth wise, I haven't cultivated that desire to what I would need to establish a mentor based relationship with someone younger than I am. That's going to be the work in progress right now.
Wait, you're saying it's something you do want to do, or you're not interested in?
I'm not interested in the moment, but I'm just saying, life has a tendency of throwing curveballs. It would be absurd of me to assume that it would never change.
Oh, okay.
Still like
Oh,
that.
so you're at least open. You would be open to it. If for some odd reason it happened,
But in an odd sense.
odd sense. No, right. In an odd sense, of course, I understand. Right, like in a technical sense, like in this reality, no, you wouldn't accept that. You'd be like, no, it's not my kid. I don't care.
Yeah, that's what I'm leaning towards now. I mean, I wouldn't want to exercise any, malevolent tendencies towards the kid.
Oh, sure.
But there's only so much sympathy you can have as a human.
Well,
at the end of the day. That's
right. I mean, fundamentally you have to decide if you want to live your own life for yourself, or you want to try to like impart that to somebody else. And maybe when we fix DNA things, this won't be so much of a problem. Maybe we could take a little time to actually help each other, right? If time weren't so short, maybe people would be a little bit more inclined to work or do other things that take time, right?
No, the thing is, you need a solid, like what men are doing now is we're like fixing the society before we even engage in doing in that shit. To me,
Yeah.
that whole question, it just doesn't. It's you can't really ask that with a broken up society, because how are you gonna? You can't take on another, because why there's a question of why, like why is like who's the father of that kid, why is he not taking responsibility for that kid, who's the mother,
Right.
why is she not taking responsibility, is it just like an in vitro fertilization type random bullshit like that, like how is that being paid for, like there's a lot of questions to take into that. Like you can't really, if there's no solid basis of society, then you can't like no, you're probably not even doing, it'd be hard to argue what is doing that child a service and what is not doing that child a service. Like if there's no society at all. Like
Final Fantasy has to go first, so let's just. Hey, thank you for being here, Phil.
It was ecstatic being able to talk with you guys. I mean,
it's been great. Thank you.
It's pretty thick water here, and we're something's going to come out of it. So.
Oh yeah. It's going to take some time, guys, but I think we're in the muck of it at the moment. But I think we're trying to plant some seeds and all that good stuff, right?
yeah.
Exactly.
All right, cool. Well, thank you, and we'll talk to you again hopefully sometime soon.
Yeah, I'll see you on the chat.
All right.
Yeah.
Peace.
Okay, continue on. Yes.
Yeah, just there's no, you can't really ask that question with what dudes are doing now, I think is basically there a lot of people are doing that right now. Like they're essentially foregoing they're for like a lot of the people who have no kids right now, like even if whether or not they plan to have kids later or not, they're essentially foregoing that right now in order to make society a place where like the majority of future kids can have some semblance of like, okay, this is a society like that's I think that's one of the big reasons of MGTOW. Like we said earlier, all these MGTOW dudes, most of them came to this sphere because some societal structure failed them, whether it was marriage, whether it was like they were homeless, whether it was like college and they dropped out of college, like whatever the case was, or like it was just some relationship that didn't go well for them and they like kind of got down this rabbit hole. Like whatever situation, they figured, okay, wait, so society is not like this isn't what we were told growing up is not what it is now. We weren't prepared and like we're here right now. So in order for there to be like something worth passing like my knowledge to, or like my genes, whatever it is, or like also for other people as well, which is explains why they're on the internet. Like there has to be something different here. Like people don't know what it is necessarily. Some people have ideas, but like at this point, a lot of dudes have acknowledged that like there has to be a change here. And a lot of them on the internet are like trying to talk with other people to discuss what it could be. Like, but as of now, like there has to be something different. Like there has to be something like some more solid basis. Like I think that's like the reason why people are going MGTOW.
Okay.
Like, and
Well,
that is in order to feel comfortable enough to like propagate their own like DNA, or just say even like for future generations. Like it's for several different reasons, I think. Also for themselves, like especially if they're pretty young like we are, because I mean we have to live in this, right? So I think it's several different, there's several different reasons for it, but it comes down, I think the whole thing comes down to society as we were told is not, like that was not good information. Like let's learn proper information and then see what we can do with that. Like before we even talk about like just more like broader scale things, like we just gotta like what's the basis of society, I think is what people are concerned with.
okay.
Yeah, so just overall, like I think I just brought that up because like I think it's tough to try to ask any dude to take on like somebody like another dude's kid, especially like with, because what's the foundation for that? Like that's just the reason I brought it up. Like what is, there's no, I don't think that's a service to the kid or the person at this point.
Well, it depends. What? Okay, hold on. This is a very rough idea, and I think it goes along the lines of some people, like men like to have dogs, right? Wouldn't you like to have the best little buddy that you get to raise and get to watch grow and like do cool things with? Like, and I don't know, get to show him all the fun things that you get to, like, you enjoy doing in life.
Sure, like that's a great, I definitely like that.
And that would feel like that would fulfill sort of like a partnership role, right? It would be beneficial for everyone. Like there's a reason to like work for each other, and like you can develop a strong bond. Now, some men obviously have strong feelings about whether or not that other person shares their DNA, right? But I imagine that some men honestly don't really care, right? Like who cares about their DNA, right? Ultimately, it's a random combination of things, right? And who gets born or who doesn't get born is sort of hit or miss, right? In the grand scheme of things, um, we're getting better about figuring that out, but it's still like, there's still all sorts of like biological complications, right, for men and women to to conceive. So having everybody seems to think that like just because we can reproduce, we have the right to reproduce. And one of the questions I'm trying to remember it. I wanted to say like, is it a right or is it a privilege to be able to go MGTOW?
I think
I was going to say that, or maybe something along those lines.
It's a
But
necessity.
anyway,
Like it's neither. I mean, you could say it's a privilege. I mean, you could say it's either, but like I think it's just to me, it's like not really. It's not really. You could technically say it's either, but I don't think that's a good. I don't think that's a good like a
I
good
don't think
adjective for it or whatever.
say again.
I don't think it's a good like it could be both. It could be both a right and because like who's gonna tell you you can't, and then it could
Sure.
be a
Okay. All right. So
privilege.
that's a poorly formulated question.
I mean, I just unless that's not what you're getting at, because like it's a clear question, but like I just don't think it's like to me it's more of it would just makes sense. Like especially given like the way society is now. Like I think that's the way of trying to fix it.
First of all, do you guys even believe in the idea of birthright?
Yeah, like I think it's important because um, if you don't have a positive birth rate, then you'll have demographic inversion, and you'll have a small amount of young people taking care of a large amount of old people, and it's not good.
Well, hold on. The fix for that technology-wise is we just learn how to edit our own DNA and we like fix aging, which is
Or
what they
yeah. Or we and or at the same time we super automate a ton of labor to relieve the stress.
Correct, exactly. That too. Longevity of human life. Like people are living into their well into their hundreds these days, right? If you live a healthy lifestyle and you're careful, like you can live a long, long time if you're relatively stress free.
Yeah, to me that like the lifespan of the U.S. citizen is going down right now. Like I just like the technology thing. All of that technology is built on a solid society. Like I just there isn't solid society right now. Like I said, I don't think our technology has been getting more complex. I think it's been getting less complex. And I think a big reason for that is like not as many people are really working on that technology.
Wait, hold on. True or false? You are in fear for your life right now.
No. Oh,
The
that's
society is
false.
not broken down.
Well, it doesn't mean just because there's no society doesn't mean you wouldn't be in fear for your life. Like I could, if you asked me that, like, and my car was like on the brink of like going off of a cliff, and I was talking to you, then I would say yeah. Or like if my house is on fire right now, and I happen to be
Okay,
talking to you, then I would say
but
yeah,
you
I'm in
still,
fear of my life. But I'm
but
not because
you
I'm
were saying
sitting down.
society is collapsing, but that in my mind that would imply that so you would be basically
Even in anarchy, you don't
I would
necessarily have to be
say
in fear for your life. Even I mean,
a
listen to
state
Michael
of
Malice. Like anarchy doesn't
a
mean
state
fear for your life or
a
like no
state of
society.
anarchy would imply that
And
right.
even
but
if
there
it
are
did, you wouldn't necessarily be in fear for your life. Like hence like all this preparedness stuff. Like people are trying to get prepared because
Fair
they
point. Fair point.
like
But
because they don't
what
want to
are
be
the
in fear for
actual
their life.
chances of anybody surviving like a real collapse of like grocery stores and electricity and like gas stations and stuff like that, right?
I mean, that's why I
no one
say
really knows.
yeah, like if you
If
have
the
food on
sewers stop,
exactly.
if sewage stops whisking away and like your toilets don't flush anymore and like water doesn't come out of your faucets, like you were saying earlier, like what do? Right? Like if you suddenly find yourself in a time where like you just don't have electricity for a few hours a day, like what do you do?
But like the Amish would be fine. Like and like third world people, they would be fine. They would just have to basically protect like their community. But in terms of regression, they live in a regret. I mean, you can do it. It's just like it's just the precedent of having to regress standard of living and technology is something that like we don't even think about.
Yes,
So we're
I
so
mean,
used to things always getting better.
I think it's been happening. Like we've slightly regressed, in my opinion, like our standard of living in America at least. It doesn't mean that.
Yeah, it's starting with the money.
Yeah, exactly. Like exactly. I mean that is it. That's like the biggest part of standard of living. Is like what's your bargaining power? Like how can you trade goods? Like and that's been diminishing slowly for like a good amount of time, and then it like diminished very sharply for a lot of people like in COVID. So I think we're already living through that like to be 100% honest, I think we're already living through that right now. Like
Well, on the economic scale, though, the interesting part is, and why some of the formulas get this wrong, is because as you slide on the scale from like a lot of people doing like relatively minor amounts of work to accomplish, some function, now you're getting hyper specialized people who are getting paid as much as hundreds of those people who were just paper pushers, basically, or like um, sales call people back in the day, right? Things like that. All their tiny efforts added up to a large sum, and then one or very few people were disproportionately rewarded for that in like a capitalistic society, right? So, what would help incentivize more interest in society in terms of like capitalistic terms, right? Like people are leaving the labor force in droves for a reason.
because they're purchasing. Everyone realizes, hey, my bargaining power like went way down. Like you gotta. It's all about like bargaining
What do you
power.
do in that situation? What are these people doing? Like, how are they surviving?
This literally we're literally going like full circle right now because like a lot of people are starting to become more self-sufficient. In the conversation we've already had, we basically just went full circle right here.
Yeah, I mean,
this. Well, not to be like an ass about it.
no, that's you're right. Like I think there's a reason because it's self-sufficiency. I mean, people are getting
Do you think that's a
self-sufficient
sustainable model? Being self-sustained.
because that will create the new model.
When things are in a state of chaos, people revert back to self-preservation. Like it's just a reaction. That doesn't mean it's good. In fact, I think it's a bad thing. But it's like it is what it is at the same time.
Well, I
And
think
there's no way to avoid that.
well it has because you can't
It's hard
skip
to say.
steps. You can't skip steps. Like I learned this when I was working out like a couple years ago. You can't skip steps if you want it to get better. Like you have to. What's going on now is like not getting better, or I mean, it's been regressing. Like to be 100% honest, like people are kind of starting to notice it now, but it's been regressing for a while. So now, so people are saying, okay, we don't want that. So it takes time to get to a point where, because there are still people trying to do the old way of like the way of doing stuff that like led to basically so many people getting displaced that like overall things started regressing. So you're still going to have a portion of people doing that. You're going to have the portion of people who got left out who are either like just mired in complete like doomsday, or like they're trying to do the new shit. You're gonna have the people who realized it a little bit ago, so like they've been trying to do new shit. Some of them have succeeded already. Some of them are still trying. Like I put myself in the place of the person who's trying. Hopefully I'll hopefully I'll like reach whatever I think success is soon enough. But like you have people in different areas of like realizing the landscape and then like their reaction to it. So like before we have another cohesive kind of social narrative, you're going to have people who like kind of go, I mean, individualistic. Like, is it a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure. But in order to get good things later, like people have to realize what's gone on and like the landscape, and people do that at their own rates. So, like personally, like I said, I kind of think things have already kind of collapsed. Like that's kind of why I'm doing, because if they hadn't, I would be on a different path, I think, than I am now. Um, but I just realized, to be 100% honest, like I said, I mean, I think it already collapsed, because you can't have, there are just certain things that a proper society doesn't have. Like no matter how many people are in it, no matter like what the dynamics are, like if you have all of these people who are like single, that's not a proper society. Like if you have this many people who are around, but like rates of self-described loneliness are this high, like that's just too paradoxical to mean that you have a functioning society. If you have money being literally printed, or I mean not literally printed, but like I mean even quicker than, like, money is being created faster than if it was printed. Like I heard this saying, money doesn't grow on trees, throughout my entire childhood, only to grow up and realize that money literally grows way faster than a tree can grow and bear fruit. Like we can print money. I mean, we don't even, what we do with money is not even, it's faster than printing it. We don't even print it. It's faster than that. Like if you have all of these things you were told growing up that aren't the case when you grow up, that's not a properly functioning society. Like so that, to me, that's why I think we're already at the time where it collapsed.
Interesting.
So
Okay,
now it's like, what do you
so
do about it?
okay, and if guys don't get trained to go into trades and to like run power plants and like drive trucks and stuff like that, like
Because you
how long
can't
can
skip steps. Because
what's that?
it's gonna, you can't skip steps, man. Like it's gonna go down. Like it's gonna get worse probably before
Oh,
it
okay,
gets
okay. So
better.
let's talk about this. Okay, so let's lay this out. What am I not hearing? Let's start there. What what is the roadmap here?
I mean, I say to be 100% honest, like we just gotta, we keep spreading the word, and we just try to survive and
Survive
stay
how?
positive. So I mean, like Morph, I mean, shit, dude, Morph Gamer and A20, like y'all are. I'm learning as much as I can from
I'm working
them
on the
about
front
that.
lines.
I
I
mean,
know I have skills. I'm rebuilding my basement.
Basically, like with the information that we know, we have the leverage of time. Until then, help yourself right now, get in a better position so that you can help other people. Like we're too young to really have much leverage yet. That's the way I see it, at least.
Are we hastening this future by believing in it?
I mean,
I don't know about all that.
I think we're observing the landscape. Like I'd say we're attempting to hasten the resurgence, but like I don't think that like wishful thinking is gonna make it better.
Sure.
because
Yeah,
like
okay.
I'd love to. I mean, I just see it around me, dude. Like there isn't
Is it
lethargy. Yeah, I think lethargy is definitely something that
Yeah,
like
but
I feel personally a
a
lot.
lot of either backwards incentives or lack of incentives.
right? Robbie and I have been talking a little bit about like incentives engineering.
Yeah, and even I think that's doomsday. Like I kind of, I think that's going to be part of like the going backwards. Honestly, like I say, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Like I think
Okay.
a lot of those ideas behind like microtransactions and cryptos, like I think that's gonna be part of it getting worse before it gets better because
No,
more.
okay, hold on. So let's game this out, guys. Let's dig into the weeds here a little bit, right? Um, what does this look like? Do women get their act together and actually like get infrastructure back online? Maybe they bulk up. Maybe they eat a lot of like whey powder and they get strong, right? I don't know.
That's not gonna happen.
Maybe they prove they really don't need no man. So what if they don't change, right? Like what if women don't like change their behavior?
If they don't change, the infographic I put in the chat is what happens.
Yeah, the environment will do it.
Literally uphold the entire
And I'm saying, what if women move into there? What if women move into that?
It's not gonna happen, bro.
They
It's
don't.
not going
Yeah,
to happen.
they because
Unless
it
it
would
was
have
a
already happened. So the thing is,
actually taking up that active.
it would
There's
have
no
already
jobs that are hard
happened.
for grown men to do.
Yeah,
Okay,
it would have already happened. Like that's why that's part of the reason we've been regressing. Like service sector economy.
All right, for jobs to be equal in ratio, that those jobs are still predominantly men.
Yeah,
It's
like it
basically
would
it's only a
exactly.
push for pushy, middle management, high positions. That's the only push for equality of the sexes in terms of like the labor force.
But now,
So it would have already happened.
In the U.S., didn't they just pass a bill about like the draft?
Sure, I mean,
Yeah, but that doesn't really matter much if you're talking about the labor force.
Well, now hold on. We're talking about like women like showing up and saying they really do want equality. Well, there you go. They're really getting some equality. Now, some of them may not like it, but some of them are like, yeah, I guess so, right? Like, I guess I gotta support my nation, right?
Okay, what we're saying is that I doubt they step up unless it was dire, right? They have the opportunity to step up now before things are bad. Right now, before things are bad, they have the option, right?
Okay.
And they have more autonomy, and they're not using that autonomy. So that's why I say, no, not going to happen.
Okay.
Because the opportunity is now, but it's not happening. If they're really about it, it would be happening now before things were in dire straits.
And you're
saying still redemption. While there's still redemption.
Right. And you say we're 2 years past the like no return point.
Yeah, I think like we said, a lot of things were already unraveling before the pandemic, but the pandemic opened up people's eyes, if you will.
Yes.
Which will probably, like Romy said, will probably further accelerate it. Right? If there's a large level of awareness, it will accelerate the trend.
Well, hold on. Now, recently, Elon Musk has gained a lot of wealth. So, like, some things will do really, really well, and then a lot of things will just not do well.
Well, because Elon Musk has basically, like, he's basically a part of the military, honestly. Like, his, like, SpaceX, for example, It's all military technology.
Yeah, he's probably getting tax incentives so that the U.S.
And
military can use his
exactly. And
intellectual
government
property.
grants. Exactly. Like it's all military. Like
Why do you
that.
think he was able to build? Why do you think he's able to build underground tunnels and shit?
Exactly.
Like, what the fuck? Like, who else has been able to come on here? Just build a tunnel under the city, you know?
Yeah, like why do you think those companies, all of these companies going to space are like competing and suing each other for government grants, man? Like he's been able to get like a lot of that like quote unquote printed money. Like the average person doesn't want to do that. Like that's why the average person doesn't give a damn about all these like quote like these rich people, because those people they're not raising the average person's standard of living. Like they're just making military technologies that the average person doesn't really give a shit about, especially in America, because we'd rather be isolationist. Like even look at Neuralink too. Like Neuralink, you really think he's making that to cure like diseases like Alzheimer's and shit? Like no, they're just trying to make super soldiers, dude. Like this is the same shit governments have been trying to do for centuries. Like make the super soldier.
Theoretically true. Although that is, I don't maybe have as much information about that as you do.
Like
So,
look at I don't know, maybe you could like if you look at the balance sheets of the companies, like you could probably figure out like how they're getting funding and all that shit. I'm pretty sure this all public. Like there's some way
that
you
could
can
be,
like look into figuring it out.
that could be if I had the, well,
Well, because
if I
if you
had the
cared, like
time or the skill set, if I thought that would be a productive use of my time, I would go after that. But I don't think I have that sort of inclination.
yeah, exactly, because it doesn't really because the stuff that these people are doing it doesn't really matter for us. Like, do we want like
Sure.
we already have weapons that can wipe out entire countries. So like why are we still trying to make more weapons that can fire off from space? Like why are we still trying to make like we're trying to make more effective methods of like mind control and shit. Like I don't see to me like I was talking to my that same buddy who was like helping me with the Linux and shit the other day. Like
Oh yeah.
I was talking to him about negative work. I was like, there's a lot of just negative work going on. Like for example, in the medical field, where you all these drugs for we're trying to create all these different drugs for like type 2 diabetes, whereas like the most effective things to do aren't even in drug form. So like that's like negative work. And then like also, for example, like a lot of this military spending being disguised as like all these entrepreneurs and shit, like in their companies, we already have weapons that can obliterate entire like cities, almost countries even.
Right.
Yet
You
we're
mentioned that.
yet we're trying to find more effective ways of like doing mind control and shit. Like even though we already have the ability, yeah, like MK Ultra, like Neuralink.
I'm
Okay,
Yeah. It's good to have you here, man. Thank you for your time.
yeah, I'll be you already know. I was
okay,
sending memes.
for
Hopefully
sure.
we'll talk again soon. We'll have to set this up again. We've been here for hours, so it sounds like you guys have a lot to say. We have so many topics to cover, so it seems like
Me and this man Romy have had like 2 or 3 other 4 or 5 hour chats, like non-stop too. So
it's
we
good.
covered a lot of stuff.
Exchanging
But
exchanging ideas and stuff. That's good, right?
anyway, yeah, I'll talk to you guys soon.
All right,
Yeah.
take care. Be
All
well.
right. Peace. Good sleep. Okay. Let me
All right,
end the like recording, and then we can
okay.
like